Well, folks, I think we'll go ahead and get started to be respectful of everybody's time. We'll probably have some folks joining us as the presentation goes forward. But good morning. Thanks for joining us this morning. I think I know most of the people on the call, but just in case, I'm John Elsesser. I'm Executive Director here at IMPEA. And I'm joined here at our offices by Andrea Anderson, who is our Communication and Membership Relations Director. And I'll get to our presenters here in just a minute. As you all know, the 2021 budget passed by the Indiana General Assembly was transformational for all sectors of schools in the state of Indiana, public, charter, and non-pubs. For those of us in the non-pub world, the changes in the financial eligibility for the Choice Scholarship Program literally rewrote the paradigm for school choice here in the state of Indiana. It was no longer focused on only families that were most needy. It's getting to the point where all folks will be able to access their tax dollars and choose the school that's the best fit for their son and daughter. Something that didn't get as much attention back in 2021 was the passage of a new school choice program, the Education Scholarship Account Program, slated to be up and running for the 22-23 school year. And unlike the voucher program, the new ESA program will be housed in the state's treasurer's office. So since last July, they've been laying the groundwork, and there's been a lot of groundwork to be laid. Part of that groundwork was hiring an executive director for the program. And with us today is the executive director, Jackie Guglielmo. And with her, I don't think she's on the screen, is Emma Weiss, who is the outreach and engagement coordinator. And today, Jackie's going to present, there's Emma. Jackie's going to present and tell you all about that groundwork, talk about the program and what it means for a non-public school to be a qualified school and a participant in the program. But right before I turn it over to Jackie, I think everybody right by now, we're all Zoom gurus, so I don't know that you need a whole lot of instruction. But because we do have a number of people on the call, just to keep it going smoothly, we would encourage you to use the chat function. We'll be monitoring that chat and sharing those questions with Jackie as time goes on. And I really would encourage you to ask questions, because the goal is when you leave this presentation today, you have a good understanding of the program and it's fit for your school and for your kids. So with that said, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jackie Guglielmo. Jackie, it's all yours.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, John and Andrea, for hosting this webinar for us. Good morning, everyone. Nice to meet you all. I may have met some of you so far. And John, I think you're the only person who can fluently pronounce my last name at this point. So kudos to you.
A lot of practice.
I know. You got it spot on. I'm so excited to be able to speak with you guys this morning about the ESA program. For some of you, it may be a bit of a review if you've kind of been tracking along the way. So we have some updates included in our presentation today, as well as some just basics about the ESA program and a little bit about how it's similar and different to the Choice Scholarship Program. So as John mentioned, please funnel your questions as they come into your mind through the chat. I will pause periodically throughout the presentation to answer any questions relevant to what I'm talking about, so you don't have to hold them to the end. And I'm not quite the Zoom guru, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and hope I do it properly. Okay, are we good? We can see it? Okay, great. I'm going to move this little control panel out of the way. So this is a presentation specifically for qualified schools. I really wanted it to focus on the information that's going to be most relevant to everybody present in today's webinar. Okay, there we go. Sorry, my toolbar seems to be in the way here. Okay, so the ESA, as John alluded to earlier, was launched last year in 2021. Our bill was passed, and we're launching the program for this coming school year, the 22-23 school year. Differently than the Choice Scholarship Program, this program is administered by the Treasurer of State's office. I'm the executive director. We have Emma, who is my outreach and engagement coordinator. We also have a deputy general counsel on staff with us, and we've grown our team even more this week. We do have an account specialist and a strategic program manager. So our team has grown since September when I came on board. Our mission with the ESA is to provide Indiana students with disabilities tax-free scholarship money that may be used for pre-approved expenses related to education. we're really hoping that these additional funds are going to give families the flexibility to customize their children's education. The importance of the ESA being a scholarship is that it will not impede a family's ability to qualify for other types of scholarships or to utilize Medicaid or Medicaid waiver. The only thing that a family cannot use simultaneous to an ESA would be a choice scholarship. So if you have any families that are qualifying for SGO or getting any other type of financial aid, that can remain. They can continue to utilize those additional funds. These are the topics that I really want to focus on today. So we're going to review student eligibility, do a brief comparison of the ESA program and the Choice Scholarship Program, talk a little bit about school responsibilities when it comes to qualified schools who participate in the ESA program. I also want to review how the grant award is calculated and how payments are made through our online portal. In addition to speaking a bit about supports that our program has put into place for qualified schools and families, so you can kind of see from our end what we plan on offering. And then I have some slides, some screenshots of our application process so that I can walk everybody through that and you can see very clearly what that application for qualified schools will look like. So student eligibility, there are 4 main eligibility requirements for students for this year of the ESA. First and foremost, they need to be a resident of Indiana, falling between the ages of 5 and 22. They must be a student with a disability for whom an IEP or a service plan has been developed, or a CSEP, so a choice special education plan. And they need to meet the income requirement, which is 300% of the free and reduced lunch rate. So that's going to be the same income requirement as the Choice Scholarship Program. There is a chart on our website that actually displays the max income cap based on the household up to 10 members of a household. So anybody that wants to access that, or any families that want to access that, have access on our main website. Ooh, I'm in there twice. Am I going backwards? I'm going backwards. Told you, not a Zoom guru yet. Why is it rotating? Sorry, guys, bear with me here. Okay, there we go. All right, you guys can see the screen again, right? Sorry about that. I don't know why that was rotating through the same slides. So a brief comparison of the ESA and the Choice Scholarship Program. First is eligibility. So as anybody that's been participating in Choice knows, there are 8 different tracks of the Choice Scholarship Program, with special education being one of them. So that is our sole eligibility for this first year, in addition to the income requirement. A big difference is expenses. So as we know, with the Choice Scholarship Program, students can utilize that for tuition and fees at a qualified school. However, with the ESA, there is a list of different qualified expenses that families can use the ESA funds to pay for. Application and processing is also vastly different. So anybody that's participating in Choice, again, this will be a review for you. Families apply for the Choice program through a qualified school. However, because it's not mandatory that a student choose a qualified school in the ESA program, they're applying completely independently through our secure online portal directly to our ESA team. So we would be the ones collecting all of the application documentation, everything to prove eligibility for that family. We also have one window for this first year. We anticipate just having the one window, and window for families is going to open up on June 27th and remain open until August 5th. So that will give families a couple of weeks at the close of our window if they don't qualify for an ESA, or we've maxed out the number of students that we can support. They still have a couple of weeks to still apply for the Choice Scholarship Program. So we did that very intentionally. Now, going forward in the future, we do hope to open that window up a bit wider, just because this was our first year of build out. We're literally building the software from the ground up. We needed a little bit more time to get up and ready, but we do anticipate in the coming years mirroring that choice scholarship application window for families. Now, providers can begin to apply next Monday, April 25th, and that application period is rolling, so that will never close. The way that payments are made are going to be a bit different. So again, once a family signs the endorsement form, Department of Education is making that payment directly. Families are never holding on to any funds themselves. However, with the ESA, families are getting the funds directly in for quarterly disbursements and making payments solely through our online portal. So the way that the funds are traveling are going to be a little bit different. What I will dive a bit deeper into a little bit later in the presentation is the flow specifically for qualified schools of the tuition and fee payments and APC funding. So I'm going to go over very briefly responsibilities of the qualified schools who choose to participate in the ESA program. First is enrollment. As I mentioned, our ESA team is completely handling the application process. So schools are under no obligation to enroll students whose needs cannot be met at that school. For students whose needs can be met, there's no collecting of any information. There's no completion of any applications. Certainly families may reach out for some assistance if they plan on continuing at your school, and maybe having an informed spokesperson about ESA at the school may be helpful, but certainly that person would not be actually completing the application. The family would be doing that themselves. I do, again, like to reiterate that qualified schools who participate need only accept ESA students who meet the eligibility criteria for their program. So if a student's disability cannot be supported, we just want to make it clear that schools are not obligated to accept any students because they're ESA recipients. There is a qualified school agreement, as there is a parent agreement and a provider agreement that all participating vendors are going to sign prior to being approved to participate in our program. I have shared that with John. I am happy to share that out, and that will also be available on our website. So it's just some assurances, some program requirements, and information about the ESA. I know in the Choice Scholarship Program, I work very closely with Brad, so I'm very familiar with obligations under Choice. We are not going to be doing any site visits unless a school requests that we come out to provide information or maybe support to some administrators or some family members. We're happy to do that, but we are not making regular site visits to inspect anything about curriculum or environment. As I referenced earlier, it may be helpful for schools to educate an ESA point person at their site. So that way if families or administrators have a question, there's a point person, and MNI will always be available to answer questions, but I think that might be helpful, especially if you have a family who is toggling between participating in Choice or participating in ESA, or perhaps they have signed up for one and are thinking about switching to the other, because it's important to remind families that they cannot utilize both simultaneously. So that will put a stop to their account. We certainly don't want any interruption in their ability to utilize their funds. So, we think of the schools as kind of that friendly face, that immediate contact for families, that you're familiar with them and they're familiar with you. So they may come to you and say, I'm in ESA, I'm thinking about going back to Choice for that second period application window, or vice versa. I've signed up for Choice and now the ESA application is open. I'm thinking about switching. So it might be important for someone to be informed at the school level. I just, again, want to reiterate a bit about the enrollment process. Every school's enrollment process will remain intact. We're not changing that whatsoever. So just kind of as an assurance to that point, parents are going to use our search portal to find any provider that's going to meet their students' needs, qualified schools being one of them. Upon application, any participating entity that signs on to accept ESA funds is going to create what's called a marketing profile. And that's just a public facing piece of information for the family. So just as if you or I use Google to find something close by our home, a similar search function will be available through our portal. So a family can search qualified school, enter their zip code, and a list of participating entities should pop up. That marketing profile helps families hone in on which qualified schools are likely to meet their students' needs. Then there's the point of inquiry, right? So just as if a family was not using ESA, the expectation would be that that family would reach out to the school and say, hey, I have a student, they have an IEP, here are their needs, and whatever that school's enrollment process that's already in place would stand. So perhaps you have the family come in, do a tour, you sit down and have a meeting, you have them, review the IEP to ensure you can meet the needs. That all will stand. There's no difference with the ESA program. Similarly, that enrollment process is going to be the same. So if a student and a school have gone through the ESA approval process, there's no additional application process on the part of the school. They're already a participating entity. That family is already an eligible student who's been accepted to the ESA. So the enrollment process at every school would just remain. So now let's talk a little bit about the ESA funds. I'm going to review how funds are calculated and how they're going to be deposited into student accounts, the fee structure, and how payments will be made to qualified schools, including APC funding. So a student's annual grant calculation is based on two components. First is the amount of tuition support that their school of legal settlement would be receiving. So again, similar to choice, it's 90% of that tuition support amount. The second factor is APC funding. So the student is entitled to 100% of that funding based on the categorization in the IEP service plan or CSAP that they're applying with, that they're uploading upon application. The current system still stands for that as well. If they have a primary of category 1 and a secondary of category 3, that amount will be combined and be entered into their total grant award amount. So this is how we're calculating what each individual student's grant award amount will be. The really exciting thing about our program is if there is additional funds left over at the close of the school year for the family, that they can roll over up to $1,000 per year, and that's cumulative. So essentially, if you have a family that's starting at kindergarten, once their child turns 5, and they have $1,000 left over each year, they could be entering 9th grade with $9,000. And that rollover will not impact their disbursement amount. So their grant award calculation will remain the same, but they're able to roll those funds over and utilize them for any qualified expense up until graduation. So whatever comes first, graduation or the student turning 22, will be the terminating event for the ESA account. I also like to kind of talk here a little bit about specifically for qualified schools. When I was traveling around the state, I had the opportunity to visit a lot of high schools, private high schools, and speak with their administrators. And a big concern that got brought up to me was our tuition and fee amount is higher than the 90%. And we know that because we participate in choice. So there's no benefit for us signing up for ESA. And I hear that and it makes total sense to me. However, when we think about feeder schools and elementary schools and students that may be entering ESA at the elementary level, where they're more likely to have some remaining funds left over, I see the benefit there for private high schools entering into the ESA and being a participating entity in the ESA, because once students are hitting high school, they may have some rollover amount that they can use to offset the cost there. And then you're already in the system to receive those students and be able to accept those funds. So I always like to kind of talk that through because not everybody thought of that, and that was enlightening for a lot of administrators. So funds are deposited into the student's account in 4 quarterly disbursements throughout the year. The first will be in August, once the account is established, then again in October, January, and April. Tuition payments to qualified schools are going to be made on that same schedule. And just as an additional assurance, ESA accounts are never combined at all in any way with a family's personal account. They cannot make deposits into an ESA. At the end of the year, it doesn't fuse with their personal account. They are always completely and totally separate. Tuition and fees, similar to choice, are determined by the qualified school. So similar to the process now for the application for choice, when you're applying to be a participating entity in the ESA program, you will upload for us your tuition and fee schedule as well. And our qualified fees are the same as choice's qualified fees. Now, just as a reminder, and I put this same reminder out there for participating, other providers, service providers, and therapy providers. Any entity may not charge an ESA student differently than any other similarly situated student. So tuition and fees for students with disabilities obviously would need to remain the same as any other student that would be participating in the school. Here are a list of qualified expenses. Now, obviously, a qualified school is not going to provide all of these qualified expenses, but I thought it would be helpful for everybody to see kind of this full list, which is determined by statute. These are all the different expenses that families can use the ESA funds to pay for. Tuition and fees at a qualified school, obviously, is one. Any assessments or examinations, I'm going to take a moment to speak to that. So a student who is an eligible student in our program and participates in the ESA is mandated to take the statewide assessment. So if they're not participating in a qualified school, where obviously the statewide assessment is administered, they need to make sure to be budgeting funds to take that examination, because it is a requirement unless otherwise specified in their IEP service plan or CSEP. Student can also use these funds for services and therapies as prescribed in their IEP service plan CSAB or as prescribed by the student's treating physician. They can use it for other educational services like tutoring, courses or programs, training camps, fee-for-service transportation. A couple of requirements that were laid down in our law that I want to review. There are only a couple of expenses that can be accessed virtually for families for this first year. Educational services is one of them, occupational therapy, and training programs and camps that have a very specific skill focus. These are the areas which families can access virtually. All others must be on-site in person. As I referenced earlier in the last slide, when we talk about as prescribed, services and therapies can only be paid for with ESA funds if they are in the IEP service plan CSAP or if they are prescribed by the student's treating physician. And families are obviously very excited to hear this because some of them have struggled to get services in their students' IEP, within the public schools. So this would not prohibit them from being able to access those services if they have a prescription from their treating physician. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the updates that happened in the last session. So this is what we got. The removal of the surety bond, where any participating entity would have had to post a $50,000 surety bond. Luckily, that language got removed, so qualified schools are no longer required to post a bond. There was also a date change. So it originally said that the accounts must be established by April 1st. Luckily, we got that moved because it's April 20th. And it got moved to September 1st, but also included in that language was our ability to set that date going forward. And that was the most important piece of that, because as I referenced earlier, we do really want to move that application window earlier. We want to give families more of an opportunity to kind of review their needs. I know schools tend to start enrollment way earlier than June. So we want to kind of match that. Obviously for this first year of rollout, it was a little bit more challenging to do so. So we do anticipate doing that going forward, and this language allows us to do that. What we hoped for that we did not get was moving account fees to an above the line expense. So let me talk a little bit about what that means. In the original language, one of the qualified expenses was account management fees. And what that means is similar to every time we swipe a credit card at the store, the store gets charged a fee for taking that credit card. That fee was going to fall to the family, and we didn't think that that was right. We wanted the family to really be able to utilize all of the funds that are going to be deposited in their account for their students' needs. So we are bearing the cost of the account management fees for the family, and we're able to do that using Class Wallet. They've set up a payment structure for us to be able to do that, so that way the fee does not fall to any providers or families. The other one was the prioritization of tuition and fee payment to qualified schools. Again, Class Wallet for the win there. What they're doing for us is they're setting up two purses. And I know some of you are familiar with the Class Wallet system. Typically an account holder will have a purse, which is where funds are deposited to. So any student that enrolls in a qualified school, which will have confirmation of through Department of Education and that student's STN number, will be able to set up a separate purse for them, specifically tuition and fees. So that will be removed and separate from all of their other disbursement. And we'll calculate that by determining what the tuition and fee schedule is based on the upload from the school, and then dispersing that into 4 quarterly payments into that separate tuition and fees purse. So as I referenced, Class Wallet is going to help us with the above the line expense by charging TOS, the ESA program, directly for all of those transaction fees. And again, as I referenced, the purse for the prioritization of tuition and fee payment to the qualified schools. Any student, I do want to speak here a little bit more about APC dollars. So similar to the Choice Scholarship Program, if a student enrolls in a qualified school and their September and December count confirm their enrollment at that school, the APC dollars will be transferred to the school upon the December count date. So that's when the APC dollars will get transferred over. However, the family will have the other distribution in their account to do the tuition and fee payment. I want to talk a little bit about supports that our team has put into place both for schools and for families. So we have these informational webinars that we're hosting. We are also happy to do additional webinars or come out to schools and talk further about ESA or put other supports in place with your school. So you can reach out to us individually to do that. Emma is our direct contact for families and qualified schools throughout the process. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to her directly. I'm also available. You can certainly reach out to me, but that is her role as engagement and outreach coordinator. And account specialists have been hired. They will be the frontline application and expense reviewers. So if a qualified school or any other applicant, including families, has questions, we will have an internal ticket system where right on your main portal page, you'll be able to submit a ticket, specify what that ticket is for, what questions or issues you're having, and they will be responding to those in real time. So now we'll talk a little bit about the application process. Every single provider, every single participating entity that would like to accept ESA funds must go through our application process and an annual renewal process. So similar to Choice, we will have you review your application, re-upload your tuition and fee. But what's different is you'll also look at your marketing profile. So that way we're sure that whatever information is public facing, whatever information you want the families to see in our search function is up to date and accurate. And you'll sign the annual participating entity qualified school agreement for continued participation on a yearly basis.
Jackie, can I ask a question really quick?
Sure.
Relates to this.
Would you like me to go back?
No. Okay. So we did get a question. They wanted to know if they are still eligible to apply as a school if their school is using the public school to provide their services.
Their special education services? Yes. Absolutely. That's a great question. So it doesn't matter what the structure, is. If the non-public school is the special education provider or the LEA is the special education provider, it does not matter. It's a great question because public schools can be participating entities, but a student may not be full-time enrolled in the public school. So they can sign on to offer courses or programs. Now, that being said, if the public school is the LEA providing the special education services, they do not need to apply separately. because the APC funds are going directly to the non-public school, and then they would be diverted from there. So there's not an additional layer to the application process, but that certainly would not prohibit a private school from participating in the ESA.
Hey, Jackie, I want to dovetail off of that question. When you mentioned
Sure.
earlier about the APC dollars and being determined or designated based on enrollment count, isn't it based on the selection of service provider? It would not go to the non-public school unless the non-public school in that application process, the parents selected them as a service provider, isn't it?
That's correct. Yep, that's correct. So if the LEA is the service provider, it's still going to go to the qualified school. If the qualified school is the service provider, it would go to them. However, if a family enrolls in the qualified school as their educational provider, but decides to choose outside special education services, then the APC dollars obviously would stay within the family's account, so that they could spend them on whatever kind of a la carte special education services that they are determining for their child. Thank you, John. That's a great question.
And Jackie, there's been a couple questions. A couple of the folks on here are not qualified schools. They're service providers, and questioning some of the differences in terms of what's being presented from the qualified school perspective. And I had said, I know there's funding differences in terms of the other providers are paid after services are provided, but you may want to clarify or set up a separate time just for a Zoom for out, non-qualified school providers, kind of.
So are we talking schools that aren't qualified schools, John? Or are we talking completely separate
There's a
types
couple
of
music
providers?
therapists on the Zoom, and they were asking, what you're saying, how that difference is different for them as an outside kind of provider.
Sure. So let's talk about that real quick. I think I do go into it a little bit later, but I would love to answer that question now. So glad you guys are on the call. Sorry for kind of speaking over you here. So any provider, any therapist, any other type of service provider, their application is going to look similar. The slides will be a little bit different going forward. So we're hosting a bunch of provider webinars, and I'll have Emma put some information about those in the chat so that you can sign on for those webinars specifically. Some of the information will be review, but some will be new information that's really specifically relevant to other types of providers. So I do encourage you guys to sign up and participate in those webinars as well. But the main difference is that because tuition and fees at a qualified school are paid up front, any other type of service provider needs to be paid in arrears for services that are already rendered. So what the process for that looks like is the enrollment process is going to look the same. Family searches for speech therapy, music therapy, whatever, in our search function with their zip code, your organization pops up. They make a phone call. You mutually agree that you would be a good fit for that child and vice versa. And then you are going to provide your fee schedule to that family. So this is how much we charge per session or whatever. Now you would invoice the family after services have occurred. And that can be on whatever cadence that your business determines. So you may choose to invoice the family after each therapy service, or you may choose to invoice them on a monthly basis. That's a business determination. It's not set by the ESA program, but it must always be for services that have already occurred. So your invoice, we have a template invoice just to demonstrate the components that need to be in it. You by no means need to use our template. Most businesses have their own template. So we don't expect anybody to change that, but we want to make sure that all the components are in there. Most importantly is an itemized, clear description of the service that was rendered, and then the amount and the cost. So that invoice is provided to the family. The family uploads it into Class Wallet, and they make a payment using the Class Wallet system. It comes to our team for an additional set of eyes on to make sure that the items in the invoice are qualified expenses, that nobody transposed a number, and then the amount being paid is correct. And then it's just a simple ACH payment because we're going to collect some banking information from all providers at the forefront during the application process once you're onboarding with Class Wallet, so that it can be direct deposit payment to that provider. So the only difference there with qualified schools is that they're uploading the invoice for the family with an itemized list of tuition and all fees that are being charged for that student. And that's going to be uploaded at the beginning of the school year. And then payments are going to be made on that quarterly basis, but they're going to be in a separate purse.
All right, I'm just going to jump in here real quick. As Jackie said, there is a provider webinar that's going to be happening today at 3 p.m. I already put the link in there for you guys to be able to register through that link. And then once you register, you'll receive the Zoom link for that.
Thank you, Emma.
Mhm.
I hope I answered that question thoroughly. If anybody else has any follow-up, feel free to funnel in the chat there. Andrea, am I good to move on?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so this is what the registration page will look like. The link to get to this page will be on our ESA website, and we'll make that available to everybody. We'll go ahead and put that in the chat as well if you haven't visited our website yet. The links on our website will be an individual entity, business entity, and qualified school. So you would just select the option that's relevant to the type of business that you are. On this first page here where it says login, you would select, actually this now says I don't have an account. So I apologize for the difference in the language there. It says don't have an account. So you would click on that and then you would see this page here where it says users create an account by filling out a few simple fields. So any business entity or qualified school would just designate an application person to fill this online application out. It's only a couple of steps and we're going to go through them here today, but there will be a designee. So they'll enter in their first and last name, email. Designation will now say job title. So whatever your job role is, whether principal, headmaster, admin assistant, whoever has been designated to fill out the application. Address. Then there's a PIN number. That PIN number is going to be established by the applicant and is going to be used for electronic signature on our agreement. So we do electronic signature in our system, so you don't have to print it and scan it in. And the electronic signature will be comprised of the applicant's first and last full legal name, and in addition to this PIN number. That's why the PIN is established. And then you'd also enter your school ID number if you're a qualified school. You click register and you would see a note to go to your email that you just used upon application just to verify your account, similar to the process of when we sign up for anything via email these days. So you would get a link and you'd go ahead and click on that link. And then your application would be verified and you'd create a password for your portal. So there's a couple requirements here. Again, very similar to us creating a password for anything else these days. 8 characters, a letter, a number, and a special character. So you go ahead and create a password, and then you'll be redirected to our home screen. If you are ready to submit an application, you would click this tab up here at the top called Intent Application. And then obviously, because you don't have any yet, you'd go over here and click New Application. Now, because on our main ESA website, you identified yourself as a qualified school, that is the option that's going to come up. If you are a business or individual entity, you would have different categories here. Once you've selected that, you would click Next. Now, I also want to point out here, you see this other option for save and exit. At any time, you can click this button and it will save your progress of your application. So if you need to go gather some documentation or say on the odd chance you wear many hats and you get pulled away to do something else, you won't lose your progress in our system and have to start all over again. So I have here all of the qualifying expenses. I anticipate the qualified schools are obviously going to select tuition and fees, but we didn't want to be limiting in that if a qualified school did offer another type of service and wanted to be able to accept ESA funds for that, we wanted to make sure that all of them were listed here. And you can select all that apply. This is not a one or the other. This square button up here will actually select all. Then they would click Next. Then here is an area where you can select which services you provide on site and which you select, which you offer virtually. and also what languages you are able to offer your services in. And all of these little carrots are, it's kind of in an accordion fashion. So for, because people are able to apply on a mobile device, this was a little bit more mobile friendly to have these collapsed, but you can click on that little carrot to expand them and then click on the carrot again to collapse it once again. So that will look like this once you've expanded the accordion there. So here's on-site services. Again, it's a select all that apply. The same for virtual and languages. I will say that languages are a mandatory field. So if you only provide services in English, that's fine. You just need to make sure you select English. Here's the marketing profile that I referenced earlier. So it's an opportunity for any type of entity to upload, say, a logo or a photo that demonstrates their business or their school. This won't say headline, this will say business name. So you would just put your school name or whatever your DBA is. So if you are a individual or business entity and you have an LLC and that's different from your business name, you can identify that here. This will be the information that is public facing. So this is what you want parents to see when they're doing that search portal. The summary will just be a couple of lines about the types of services that you provide, though we are pulling that information automatically from your application. So that will be noted on your marketing profile. So based on the selection from a couple slides ago, that will be listed up at the top next to your business name. But say you wanted to put in the summary, we've been providing private school education for the past 30 years, and we specialize in treating students with autism. Something like that. This would be an appropriate place to put that information. So here is what on-site services would look like once the accordion is expanded. Oh, are we going around and around it again? Okay, here we go. So once everything is selected and the documentation is uploaded, then you would sign the provider agreement. So you would have to scroll down, make sure that you read all of this information. Again, the full document is going to be available on our website. Happy to also email it out to anybody that would like it in PDF form. And then electronic signature is full legal name of the applicant and that 4-digit PIN that you created at the onset of registration. So once you've submitted your application successfully, it will look like this down here at the bottom. Your application has been successfully submitted and it will give you an application number. As I mentioned earlier, at any time you can save and return to your application later, in which case the next time you log on and you select intent application, it will look like this. So it will show your application status in draft, and then you'd have this accessibility button here where you could click and edit your application. It will take you right where you left off. I also want to talk a little bit about what the other statuses are and what they mean. So as we mentioned, submitted means that you've successfully submitted your application. Now at this time, you cannot view or edit your application. If you need to change something, you can submit a ticket and we can do that for you internally. But once it's submitted, it's in there. Under review means that one of our account specialists has opened your application and is reviewing it and putting their eye on the documentation that's been uploaded. Now for qualified schools, that's going to be tuition and fee schedule, accreditation, and business license. But all of that documentation will really depend on the type of expense that you're offering. So say you're a music therapist, you may be asked to upload your certification or your licensure to prove your scope of practice in the state of Indiana. Information requested is a status where an account specialist has begun to review your application, but something might have gone a little wrong. Maybe you've uploaded the wrong document or the expired accreditation or something. So an account specialist has reviewed that and they need you to make a change. So they're going to put your application in information requested status, and you will get an email from us with specifically what we need you to go in and fix, in which case now your application will be in edit status. So you'd be able to click this, go ahead in and make whatever changes or amendments you need to your application and resubmit. Once the account specialist has reviewed that new information, they can certainly put you in approved or denied status, and you would get email notification of either of those statuses as well. Do we have any questions about application process?
None in the chat so far.
Okay, sounds good. So again, I get this question often: how will families find us if they're not already students in our school? We have created from the ground up a search portal for families to be able to use, and that will be completely public facing. So families won't need to register, they won't need to have an approved account or an application in draft, they won't need to have any of that. They will be able to go in and start utilizing that search function here once we have participating entities up and in the system. And we really want entities to make that marketing profile as specific as possible so that families can really hone in on the providers that are going to meet their children's needs. I don't know what is up with Canva today. Here we go. So here is a QR code to our website, which also has this information. Once we have this video, we'll go ahead and post that up there as well. We have a resources page, and we have specifically a provider page that will offer a lot of this information as well. And then you have the contact information for my team here. And that's it for my presentation. Andrea, did we have any other questions come in?
No, we have not. If anybody else has a questions, go ahead and put those into the chat.
Hey, Jackie, I'll kind of keep things a segue here, ask you, I have my list of questions as we've gone through.
Sure.
You referenced earlier about maxing out, and most of the folks are familiar with the choice scholarship program, because it runs through state tuition support. There is not a maxing out of funds available for the program, but with the ESA program, it's a separate line item, a separate allocation to the Treasurer's Department. Can you speak to that in terms of the funding that's available for the ESA accounts?
Sure. So we were given an appropriation, a set appropriation to make grant disbursements. So the number of students that we're going to be able to support is really dependent on the total grant award amount for each student that applies. If we have primarily students that fall into the severe categorization of disability, their grant award amount is going to be significantly higher. So we'd be able to support less students. If we have primarily students with speech or communication delay, the categorization of disability there carries a smaller amount, so we'd be able to support more students. So when I say maxing out, I'm referencing we may have, robust show out for parents applying, and we may cap our disbursement. We may be able to utilize it all, which is my goal. I never want to turn people away, but certainly we do want as many families as possible to be taking advantage of this. So that way in future years, we can advocate for a higher appropriation amount or the removal of the cap altogether. And that way we'd be able to support any student that applies for the ESA similar to the choice program.
And Jackie, is that a first come, first serve? Or I can't remember. Is there a lottery component in the law, or how does that work in terms of if you would reach the maximum capacity?
Sure. You mean when we reach the maximum, John? Positive vibes. So we've gone back and forth about that a lot. It's really going to look more like a first come, first serve, but really all that means is as applications are coming through, we're reviewing them in real time so that families can have a determination more quickly. I thought about taking all of them and at the close of the window, putting it into a big pot and kind of turning it and picking out a ball, right? But that would mean that families are families that apply early on in the process are not going to hear for quite some time about whether they've been given an ESA. And I didn't want families kind of waiting on that information so that they can make a determination about what they're going to do for their students' education for that school year. So that's why we opted to do it. I hate calling it a first come, first serve, but as applications are coming in, we're reviewing them in real time and being able to give the family that feedback pretty quickly on a turnaround about whether they've been approved for an ESA or not.
Makes sense. I mean, unfortunately, if you had to wait there may not be spaces available at schools anyhow. They may be full. They wouldn't have
That's right.
So I think a couple other questions popped up, Andrea.
Sure.
Yes, so I'm going to try to paraphrase. So there's a school here, actually this is from Ron Colley. Thanks, Chuck, for the question. So we
Hi,
have
Ron Colley.
Yeah,
I visited them.
so I'm going to read this. So, we have a vibrant program for students with special needs. We have a solid relationship with our LEA, and we have access to a large amount of funding on an annual basis to support these students. So why would we want to consider to apply to be an ESA school? So he's not clear on what the benefit is to the school on becoming an ESA school.
So it really wouldn't change the relationship with the LEA. All it would allow students to do is use ESA funds to pay the tuition and fees. And if they have any remainder left over, they could either roll it over, they could use it for other expenses, or they could even utilize it within the school for other additional items. So for instance, I know some schools may charge for, say, AP classes that are elective versus required by the curriculum, for example. And I know Choice does not allow that as a acceptable fee. That's not covered by the Choice Scholarship. Families would be able to utilize ESA funds for those types of elective courses because they're an educational service provided by an approved provider. As I mentioned earlier, it doesn't really impact the relationship. The school is not mandated to now be the special education provider. If they have that strong relationship with their LEA, they would just be transparent about that when the families are applying. They could say, hey, I visited Ron Colley. They do have a wonderful program, very robust. They would want the family to have the full description of what their services look like and who provides them. As I mentioned earlier, if the LEA is the service provider, that's the school would still get the APC funding so that they can kind of maintain the payment exchange as it is right now. The ESA is not changing that. I think it's also important, as I referenced earlier, to think about feeder schools. So students that are coming into Ron Colley High School that may have been participating in ESA may have had the opportunity to roll over some funds that they could potentially utilize to offset the cost of the tuition and fees once they reach high school. But I think the diversity of our qualified expenses may appeal to non-public schools and may be a value add there.
Jackie, I think I'm going to ask the next question correctly, but maybe not. So can you talk more about the timing of approval of a family for, well, okay, never mind. Maybe this is not for family. I'm going to read the questions. When choosing the ESA program, there's not a guarantee that the tuition will be covered, ? With Choice, we can at least assist our families with budgeting and tell them what the award amount will be for them.
That would be the same with the ESA. I mean, they're not getting a different amount with ESA than they are with Choice. Choice doesn't always cover tuition and fees either. And so similarly, a student may continue to qualify for other financial aid. They can still accept that if they're participating in ESA. So if they were getting an SGO or anything else, they would still be able to use that with ESA. That's not changing. But that's a very true statement, especially when you get to the high school level. Tuition and fees may be more than the ESA amount. We're very transparent with families that that's something that they need to consider when they're thinking about applying for certain schools, because they are responsible for that gap payment. Now, whether that's made up in financial aid or whether that's coming out of pocket, that's got nothing to do with ESA. It's going to be beneficial for families who would have some wiggle room in that funds are left over, or they want to do something completely different and create an a la carte menu of services. But it's no different than Choice. So whatever a school is doing now for a family that's utilizing Choice, where Choice, that 90% is not meeting the tuition and fees, would be the same.
Okay, I think that is the last question, unless somebody else wants to put more in there.
Not seeing any others, and you can see the contact information there on your screen. It's got Jackie's email, phone number, Emma's, and Chris's as well. So I'm sure a lot of information to take in, a lot to digest. And I would take advantage of those emails and those telephone numbers if you have questions after you think about all of this after a while, or if you have any other follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to me as well. But definitely Jackie and Emma are the experts. So don't hesitate to follow up. I can tell you my working relationship with the Treasurer's Office has been excellent. They've been very responsive. Concerns that we've brought to them, they have tried to address initially legislatively and then administratively. So they've been a great partner to work with. So I'd encourage you to reach out to them with any questions that you may have about the program or about how the program fits, with your school's program and needs and your students.
Thank you, John. And I'm happy to share these slides with everybody. I know it is a lot of information. So if you guys would like to walk through this visually within your teams, happy to share this. And we'll also be posting this on our website once we get the link to the video so you guys can rewatch the recording. Happy to share that information. Please feel free to reach out to us individually as well by email if you would like us to just send the slides to you directly. But John, I'll make sure you have them, and Andrea too.
And
Perfect.
if you had so much fun today, we're doing this again tomorrow at 2:00. If you didn't master it and you want to come back and sit through it again after you had a chance to digest, you have that opportunity. Just make sure you register for tomorrow's 2:00 session. It'll be a repeat, but it may be helpful to have that repeat as well.
And we'll be sending out our monthly newsletter next Thursday. So we will make sure we include the link to the slides as well as the presentation recording in that newsletter.
Hearing nothing else, Jackie, Emma, thank you. And folks, thank you for joining us. And this is the beginning of a new program, the beginning of a conversation, and I'm sure that we'll continue to be working on it together. So don't hesitate to reach out, and God bless the remainder of your school year, folks. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.